Good afternoon and welcome back to the budget discussion where we were talking with Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency. This is continuing a list of questions from the councillors this afternoon. So we are starting with Councillor Daigle Gammon. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Chair, and to Chief Stubing, thank you very much for a lovely presentation. You and I have had, we're in each other's company quite a bit lately and lots of questions, and I must say that I appreciate the time that you and your team have given me.
I'm going to interrupt for just a second. It sounded like there was a heck of a lot of noise in the background. Councillor Daigle Gammon, I'm not sure if that was on your end or on the Chief's end, but I don't hear it now, so.
I'm in an empty house except for my dog who's sleeping, so I think I might be okay. Good?
It sounds like it. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I do have a couple of quick questions. One or two you may refer me to in camera, and I'll respect that too. On some of the slides where we were talking about the KPIs, I'm just wondering the arrow differences up or down, what numbers they relate to, what are we comparing? I'm not sure that I'm comparing them the right way, so I have trouble seeing the math work. So that might be just a quick little math question. But when we look at, and the concern for me is the volunteer stations. So when we look at 22 volunteer stations and 490 active volunteers, from our conversations and some of the conversations in my community, I know that people are feeling that the lack of volunteers is at a crisis moment, especially in those stations that are completely volunteer run, or even those that are composite stations where paid firefighters are like the day shift, and then evening and off time seems to be mostly covered by volunteers. So, and I stand corrected, but I think there's a hybrid within that hybrid where, you know, it's just volunteers. So I do wonder about paid firefighters. Do they do shift work? How does that happen in terms of the coverage being part-time paid and part-time volunteer? So that would be interesting for me. And the other thing I would like to know is the percentage of budget that is dedicated. I think Deputy Chief Muldoon said $2 million for volunteers. And so I was just wondering, as a percentage of budget, and when you look at the coverage that they provide, is there any metrics to say that that is the appropriate amount or not? And I guess within compensation and benefits is probably where the volunteer component is. So I'm just wondering if that's ever been separated out so we can fully understand the investment that we're making in volunteers. So the investment in terms of the awards, the annual honorarium, in kind, like the training, the equipment and PPE stuff, all of that. Like, how do we see the investment that we make in volunteers? And I believe Councillor Outfit and Councillor Lovelace, I would completely agree with them both too about needing to invest maybe a little bit more in the volunteer section because we are so dependent on it. And especially where we're so dependent on it in those volunteer stations that a lot are outside of the core. And the other is a question around the in the service area on community risk reduction, professional development and logistics, the increase of the 1.576 million. I'm just wondering a little bit of trying to understand what that is. And in other business units, when they're presented to us, we know if they're over or under. And in this presentation, I don't get to see if it's over or under, and I think maybe is it just that it's a different way that Halifax Fire and Emergency presents. So those are my first set of questions. And I guess the other piece is when we think about our fire protection emergency services, it's professional firefighters, volunteer firefighters. Then there's the mutual aid agreements or service agreements with partner municipalities. And so there are some questions that I would have about those, where I would see them represented in the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. So that is the opening volley. So over to you, Chief Stubing.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to our councillor. So quickly, I'll go to maybe your second last question, which was on the I think what you were asking was the cost breakdown of the money going into community risk reduction, logistics and prevention, what that equates to. So that is found on the summary of changes slide, which is the second last slide, with the last slide just being the picture of the fire trucks. So it's the last slide of consequence. And in that breakdown, you can see there was $120,000 going back into the budget that was taken out of the recast budget for PPE. Obviously, you know, that's pretty important during a pandemic. That includes turnout gear and medical PPE and supplies required to keep our members safe. Then there's uniform and clothing increase. That again was the money taken out for the recast budget. That would not only cover our contractual obligations with our career firefighters in our collective agreement, but also uniforms for our volunteers to represent the organization well and be part of a one-team culture. And these are, so what I can share with you is these numbers came after a 3-year analysis on these budget pressures, and we're going to be in the budget in March and then taken out for the recast budget. So they're basically going back in, and they are based on, you know, I guess now probably 4 years of data of overspending, i.e. not enough money to cover the operating expenses. So then there's a general equipment number of 153,000, and that is, you know, repairing broken machines, you know, whether that's pumps or tools, stuff that becomes defective over the course of the year. We do not have a capital budget, there is a capital budget item as well as our operating budget, but we do not have a capital replacement strategy, so an asset management strategy. So we kind of break it when it fixes, we fix it when it breaks, and we do periodic maintenance out of our operating budget. So that's putting money back into that budget, and you know, that's carried on further with equipment and maintenance repairs. You can also see our professional services increase. So that is for mental health for both career and volunteer firefighters. That's the money that was not put back into the budget in the recast budget. So that's $13,100. So that's for career and volunteer members for our firefighter and family assistance program. And then we have money going back into our budget for training materials, largely, you know, to support our officer development program and our career and volunteer recruit training program. So they all get textbooks, they get training supplies. You know, that covers also doing repairs on the training facility, you know, refilling props that we use for training. So that's the breakdown of the community risk reduction budget that you see. You can also see there's money being taken out of our budget for AVLs, and that's going over to fleet so that all our automatic vehicle locator money municipally is in the same place. So I think hopefully that answers your question on that. The question on the arrows is fairly easy. When you take a look at the pictures that have arrows, you can see underneath the arrow a little table. So there's a year, there's 2 years in most of the slides in the little table, and the arrow refers to the new big number in comparison to the 2019 number. So it's either up or down in performance. Does that make sense?
Mr. Chair is telling me that I'm over time. My question on the 1.5 was that was previously approved and just coming back in. And then on the numbers, I'll have to come back on that.
Okay, but the explanation on the arrows makes sense then for you?
Well, if I take 72.5 from 74.4, I don't get an 8.8% reduction. So I'm wondering.
Okay, so I'm going to pass this. So I asked the same question, and I had to go way back to my post-secondary education when I took statistics and analysis. It is not a mathematical difference, so I was not following the question. it is a drop in performance. So although it, 7.1 points, it's actually an 8.2% drop in performance. Maybe our division chief of performance can weigh in on that if you have more information. Did I explain it okay?
Yeah, so it's percentage change.
So percentage change is what it equates to. So hopefully that helps. It's the right way to illustrate that in a statistics analysis. Hopefully that helps. So I'm going to move over to Deputy Chief Andrews, who talk a little bit about your questions on the volunteers, and Dave, Deputy Chief Meldrum will assist with that question as well.
Good afternoon, all. Mr. Chair, through to the councillor, thank you for your question. I think I'm going to address question 2 and 4. I'm the Deputy Chief of Operations and generally deals with the employing of our career and volunteer members, but I will hand over to Deputy Chief Meldrum, who is primarily focused on the recruitment and attraction of our volunteers through his pillar. Obviously, the strength of our current response model relies on a strong career and volunteer complement. Recruiting in our rural remote areas in particular remains to be very challenging for us. We are stemming the tide both with changing demographics, an aged population, as well as a reduction in kind of volunteerism in general. And we're always looking for strategies to enhance our ability to recognize and employ our volunteers. Some of the things that we do in the event of a storm coming our way, we staff up some of our volunteer stations in what we call storm coverage. We also use our volunteers occasionally in the Corps to backfill stations, composite stations for training events when our career members are off training. And we are going to continue to look at these such strategies to find a better way to employ our volunteers, to honor their service and ensure that we provide for the public safety of all our citizens, both urban and rural. I'll now hand off, I think, to answer a few of your questions about volunteer kind of recognition and compensation. I'll hand over to Deputy Chief Meldrum. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and through the chair to you, Councillor. Welcome. Hello again. I understood one of your questions to focus on rather an estimation of the value of what our volunteers do in terms of our fire coverage and kind of comparing that to fire's budget. Is that correct?
Yes, it was looking at the level of investment that we make, yes.
Absolutely. So I've just done some hasty math and I don't have access to a financial assistant, so forgive me if the details, if I'm not precisely correct, but if I look at fire's total proposed compensation budget and I look at the volunteer honorarium and the stipends that we give to our volunteer officers, which puts us in the neighborhood of 3.6 million, we would see that our volunteer recognition would comprise a little less than 5% of total compensation overall in this proposed budget. Certainly, I would opinion that the land area or geography that our volunteers cover is very, very large, and they provide primary service to many areas of HRM and to many residents. I don't have comparative data right now with other fire departments with regard to this question. It's a very interesting question, actually, and thank you for it. And most volunteer fire departments, I think, may not have the same balance that HRM has in terms of urban density versus rural communities and the concentration of career and volunteer firefighters. So does that help in some way to start answering your question?
It does, thank you.
With regard to, in addition to the challenges we face, so, and I think you're familiar with these challenges, not only in HRM, but across Canada and indeed North America, recruiting volunteer firefighters continues to be a challenge, particularly in communities of lower population. Unlike some other volunteer opportunities that exist, this opportunity, while it's highly rewarding and fulfilling, is extremely demanding. There's significant time demands on those people who do step forward, And because this work is, as we've said before, it is difficult and it can be dangerous, there are substantial physical demands as well. So physical ability is a consideration. So in communities where age and other demographics restrict the ability of folks, you know, with two partners who both work, or single parent families, and the physical demands for the ability to actually do the physical tasks of firefighting, these are challenges that we're trying to overcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that in-depth response. I appreciate it. Councillor Hensby.
Hello. Some of the questions were kind of asked by Councillor daigle Gammon in regards to the our mutual aid agreements. I know Hubbard, Enfield, and Ecom-Secom. So I want to know the status of those. I want to know our state of readiness for wildland fire interface, you know, our wildfire situations that we have. I'm very proud to say I have 14 fire stations in my district. Quite a bit of them are volunteer firefighters, and I've always wanted to see a preferential hiring regime whenever career opportunities come up. I think our volunteer firefighters should have preferential treatment in that. I'm also wondering about our PPE for our volunteer firefighters. Are we meeting the wardrobe demand for them? And also curious about our EMO, our GSAR, and GEM teams. You know, I want to know how that our working relationship is going with that. I'm very happy to see all the generators being installed finally. A lot of our community facilities across my district in regards to community comfort centers. I'm very supportive of the request for an assistant manager for EMO. Emergency management is desperately needed to help assist with that task. And I'm very happy to see the Eastern Shore Lifestyle Center, the Sheet Harbor Recreation Center, go in tandem with the fire station. I'm glad to see the budgets are in sync with one another, being built together. I'm glad to see that. But I'd like to see the full-time firefighters, when we do get the facility down there renovated to accommodate them, I'd like to see them remain as citizens within the community instead of commuting back and forth. Be a much more of addition to the community. And my last question would be about a sprinkler bylaw. Do you think it's time for us as a municipality to have mandatory sprinklers of all new construction, new home construction?
Thank you through the chair to your questions, Councillor. Certainly a lot to tackle there. I did hear you say specifically Hubbard, Ecom-Secom, and what was the third?
Enfield.
Okay. So we are currently in contract negotiations mutual aid, automatic aid agreement negotiations with Enfield. As we're in the midst of those negotiations, we can't speak publicly about them, but there was information shared on that shortly after January 5th or something, I believe, as well as last night we put out a post on that. During those discussions, we continue to respond as we've done for many, many years and continue to provide the services mutually through the agreement that we had in place until such time as hopefully those discussions are fruitful in developing a new agreement. There is no change in the Ecom-Secom mutual aid agreement at this point, but we are in the midst of reviewing all of our mutual aid agreements. We just have not got to that one yet. We have had fruitful conversations with Hubbard's. We are, operating in principle as we would see the new agreement playing out, save and except one exception. We've recently met with IES and ICT to talk about moving Hubbard's dispatch back to be dispatched by IES, and at this point, again, we're in contract negotiations, so I can't go in great details about what that would look like, but certainly that would be a significant improvement from the current state. I'm looking forward to that. As far as your question on wildland urban interface, that continues to be a risk that keeps me up at night. This has been a bit of a wet winter, so I'm thankful for that. But it's not very far from wildland season, as you are very aware. We are working currently, I mentioned this in my comments earlier, we are in collaboration right now with departments of lands and forests on starting a Fire Smart program that we would operate out of all of our rural stations, stations that have fully volunteer complements, as well as our stations where we have our e-platoon model. And the concept would be similar to what we're doing with our FSMI programs in the urban core, where instead of our firefighters that are on duty going out and doing inspections to assist fire prevention for building inspections, they would be going out and participating in public education and wildland urban interface strategy mitigation efforts in their community. So trying to, help increase the awareness and measures people can take to mitigate that risk. So that is in our business plans for this year, and we're certainly excited about that. As far as the PPE question you asked for volunteer, I think that we've made big strides over the last year and more plans for this year, where we are trying to strategically locate washing machines, special washing machines and dryers designed to clean our personal protective equipment. So historically, we had one of those facilities that was centrally located, and after a fire, it's an industry best practice to clean your turnout gear because the cancer-causing agents are actually embedded in the gear. So we would historically run out, drop off a spare set of gear, pick up a bunch of gear for the firefighters whose gear got dirty, drive it back into the city, into the urban core, launder it, dry it, drive it back out to the community and exchange that gear. So that took some time to do. What we are doing is creating strategic locations where we have the washing machines and dryers in the location so that they can clean the gear immediately, and in those same locations, a cache of gear that is it wouldn't be perfectly fit gear, but mostly fit firefighters. So if we have somebody who's kind of unique size, we would have one of those types of gear there to fit them. But a cache of gear so that they can use that gear while their gear is in the washing machine in case a call comes in while they're cleaning it. So our future state would be to have one of those sets of washing machines and dryers in every station. That's in industry best practice. But, we're trying to do this in a fiscally responsible manner in, bite-sized pieces, so to speak. So I think we've made really good progress. I was just at a fire last night, actually. This was not volunteer, but same applies. The fire we just talked about that happened in Sackville, before the crew got back to the station, their replacement gear was sitting there waiting for them because when they got back, they're cold and wet. They get out of their gear, have a shower, change their clothes, and they have dry gear to work the rest of the shift in. And then before they came in to do their next shift, their gear was returned to them fully laundered. So I think it is working. We still got, more plans to improve that, obviously. The GSAR team and GEM teams, you did probably notice that we do plan on continuing to meet with each of those groups. They are critical in our needs. I imagine Erica is online, so I'm going to pass the talking stick over to Assistant Chief Fleck just to, add more information on that.
Thanks, Chief, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Councillor, for the questions. So I would say that we are struggling a bit with both GEM and GSAR because of COVID. The year has not been kind to us with our volunteer numbers and obviously being able to get out into the communities. But we continue to work with both groups, the 4 GSAR teams in our RESAR, and with the GEM teams in trying to give them appropriate tasks. And with GSAR specifically, right now I have them working on training with what 3 words. And so we have big plans for Emergency Management Week, the first week of May, that all of the teams, both GSAR and the GEM teams, will be out in the communities, with COVID restrictions, to start pushing more messaging out. But I do continue to engage them at least once a week with one of the groups, try to make at least one of their meetings. You know, obviously we've been moving to virtual meetings, and then with the RESAR teams, I just met with them a couple of weeks ago with just the executive in person, and then again, you know, joining into their virtual meetings when I can.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Cuttle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, hello, Chief Stubing. Nice to see you again. I want to thank you for that wonderful tour I had of Station 62 not too long ago. You know, first of all, I just want to start off by saying that many of the questions I had were headed off at the pass, either through your excellent presentation, there's a lot of great information, and through the questions of my fellow councillors. I just want to point out that I think that pursuing accreditation is a great goal, and I'm glad to see that we're doing that, that our fire service is doing that. And I also want to commend you on kind of your approach to innovation, with the drones, and also, in regards to Station 62, which really reflects the ambitions around diversity and inclusion through things like your gender neutral bathrooms, or designing an entire station around being in embracing inclusion and taking care to ensure that people, regardless of gender, are very welcome, and you really feel like that space was designed for everybody. I mean, it's an amazing job, and really, really well done. And also with that one in particular, how you built in the community amenity, and which I think is particularly important for communities like Williamswood, where there aren't a lot of municipal facilities to accommodate community gatherings and other such things. So I think that's an excellent example of a fire station. And I'm also happy to see that you're doing the heavy urban search and rescue phase 2. I think that's particularly important, particularly going forward as we anticipate perhaps more unpredictable weather and other things. But like some of my other colleagues have stated, my big concern out of this presentation is around our response to growth and development, and in particular, increasing density. I see the regional plan review happening now as a really fantastic opportunity to look at particularly our new suburban designs and how they accommodate transit, and they accommodate things like fire services. On one hand, we have this ambition of growing, which does create greater complications when it comes to having a fire service that's efficient. And on the other hand, we're looking at being fiscally responsible and more efficient and keeping costs down. So these things sometimes they do come to an head. But when I see communities like, for example, in Spryfield, Governor's Brook, which was designed with no real consideration of transit or fire service, and I know that there's 2,200 lots already approved in my district for suburban development, I have to ask, as a city, what are we doing so that we don't further exacerbate the situation and set ourselves up for failure when it comes to providing an effective fire service? Another example is suburban development, where we allow people to subdivide rural lands in the exurbia, where we allow people to subdivide land based on the municipal planning strategy, which requires 2-hectare lots. We have all these private roads meandering way back into yonder with very few houses, which I imagine are almost impossible to meet an EFF standard, where we've known for decades that what we need to do is be pursuing conservation design. And why aren't we changing our municipal planning strategy to make things like land conservation a priority, which also increases the effectiveness of things like fire service? So, I feel in some ways, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, and we're not necessarily coordinated. And so my question really is around, how does fire and safety right now interact with planning and development in regards to kind of best practice around subdivision design? And in those new builds, are there advances in building and construction best practices based on a fire safety goal? And how is that information being connected to our planning and design and our development approvals?
Thank you, Councillor, through the chair to that question. Some really good stuff in your questions there. I do have Division Chief Matt Covey online, so while he prepares to speak, I'll maybe make some introductory comments. Matt Covey is our Division Chief of Fire Prevention and actually works very closely with Kelly Denty's team from Planning and Development. And I certainly can't take credit for, some of the work that was done before I got here or this team since I've been here. But we have tried to work much, much closer with planning and development in urban design than maybe historically done in the fire service, and also with Brad Anguish's team as it comes to, roads and traffic calming measures, which obviously sometimes are a challenge for us trying to get somewhere quickly. So while I wait for Matt, I would say that we are trying to do that work better. We are, engaging in conversations with partners in the community about some exciting partnerships as it pertains to new developments for fire-specific needs, i.e. stations, which are kind of innovative and exciting opportunities. We'll be bringing more information. Stay tuned on that in future conversations. But we are also trying to be very involved in the urban planning space and are actually in conversations with our union right now. And actually we have had some conversations and plan for more in the very, very near future on being more proactive and having individuals with the right skills in our fire prevention branch to talk the same language as Kelly Denty's team and looking at plans so that we're trying to head stuff off at the pass, so to speak. So while I've been delaying a little bit for Division Chief Covey to tap on, I'll shut up and let him speak to your question specifically.
Hi, Matt. Nice to see you again.
Hi, Councillor. Twice in 1 week. Pretty good. So thank you for your questions through the chair. Your first question around subdivision design, I would share your concern and frustration with what we see out there. One of my pet peeves, flag lots, and what those look like. Very frustrating style of development that we have to deal with, which, like you say, generates very creative and awkward plans. We do have people that are assigned to look at those plans and comment them on them. And we do, if there's an obvious fire safety concern, we do talk about that in our review, but ultimately the Red Book is deciding and the planning rules are deciding what is allowed there. So there's only so far we can really take that. I do acknowledge that there's work to be done there, even with requirements for things like dry hydrants, which are not currently a requirement in development, and entrance design and having those entrance contingencies are things that need to be built into those plans. So I think that we need to work closely with the engineering and planning folks for the Red Book requirement, which kind of decides some of these limitations to build more fire safety into that. But I would acknowledge that planning and development does include us in the process and allow us to comment. So that is always appreciated. When it comes to new building design, most of the obvious things have been looked after. It seems like most new building design is focused on evacuation. That's where a lot of the latest kind of additions go to. It's about compartmentalizing, preventing smoke from traveling through the buildings, and providing early alert through smoke and carbon monoxide alarms. So we see that the requirement for smoke and carbon monoxide alarm has grown quite a bit from what we saw before 2005. So there's been big advances there, but otherwise not really a lot of changes with building construction They can be sprinkled now, but they're not required by code, so we don't see a lot of sprinkler systems going in. We do sit with planning on their larger planning designs, planning applications. We have 2 people that are engaged in that. And we work very closely now, more closely now than we have in the past with planning and development, building standards and development, to have a fire kind of element, a fire safety element to their plan review. And I see that only growing as we go forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kent.
Mr. Chair, do you mind if I just add one more comment on
Absolutely.
the building
Go ahead.
code? So this is certainly a fire and emergency service presentation. So, you know, speaking on with the perspective of somebody who does that line of work, I can tell you it's the position of the Canadian Fire Chiefs Association that has big concerns over building code requirements as it pertains to the ability to keep firefighters safe. So you heard Matt mention about, you know, the code focuses on ability for people to make egress out of a building, which is absolutely accurate. What the Canadian Fire Service is concerned about is the building envelope's structural integrity when it's exposed to heat, and the ability to take the weight of not only the occupants that were in the building trying to get out, but firefighters and their equipment trying to get in to make rescue. You know, it is not uncommon that we, you know, do not see houses last as long when they're under a fire load condition that we used to back in the day. So we used to have a rule of 20 minutes to flash over, which is when the whole building goes up in flames. We're talking, you know, before the first unit arrives now because of the building construction materials and methods. So certainly that's a concern with a fire safety lens.
Right, and I think that's what I was getting at with that question, particularly in relation to the Barhoe fire in Spryfield and the quality of construction that I see happening in some of our new subdivisions. I'd like to talk about that more another time. Thank you.
You are absolutely welcome to come back, Councillor Cuddle, but for now, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Chief, for your assistance for all of this great information. I also appreciate all of the input and questions that my council colleagues have offered here. I have, in District 3, we have one station in the Eastern Passage area, but none at all in the Dartmouth South area, which is significant, and we rely on the surrounding stations to do what they need to pull together and respond. So all of these questions in relation to all the other stations is really helpful for me to be able to support the needs of the residents that I represent. I'm really particularly pleased to see the the commitment and the strength of the role that ground search and rescue and the amateur radios folks play along with the volunteer firefighters. And I understand completely around, you know, this has been a unique year this last year and we're going into continuation of it. So I appreciate that from a taxpayer's perspective that you are being very strategic and specific about constraints that you may have around fiscal responsibility. I also have one of those stations that is a hybrid of both volunteer and career firefighters, and I know we've chatted before, and I've chatted with others in the community around, you know, the recruitment and challenge, and it's also there's so many factors that play into it with age and ability, of course, and geography of where they live and their home dynamics, but also the politics of being in a community group. They community getting along, working together strategically, agendas that come to the table. So I have a lot of faith and trust in certainly Chief Meldrum, Assistant Chief Meldrum, and your team to work through that. I also want to state today that I have been in politics since 2004, and I have never ever had a complaint about fire services and response times and response professionalism. ability to deal with the matters at hand. So I want to offer my congratulations to those that are serving, certainly within District 3. Can't speak to others, but that's significant. I mean, you can't say that about a lot of issues that we face in service delivery in HRM. So I just wanted to make sure you're aware of it. I do have a question around the emergency generators and the locations that we have them in place now. I guess I want to know from you, just a short answer is, do you think that we are now at a complement of those locations that we can meet the needs of? I mean, we can't predict crisis events, but we can try based on past experiences, and obviously climate change and things like that affect it. I'm just wondering, do you feel that we have enough in locations, and do you think that they're outfitted to the degree, excuse me, that can handle what is needed there? Also, my second question is, I've been looking through the report. Obviously, you had directive from the CAO, as everyone has, around the priorities that we approved in council for your envelope of your budget that you put forward, and I'm not seeing, and I just want to be pointed to it in case I've missed it, but I'm not seeing in any over budget ask. I just want to clarify, there's nothing on the table there for you today, is that correct?
Sure, Councillor. Through the chair to your question, I'll start with your last question because I can answer that while we wait for Assistant Chief Fleck to jump on to answer your question about the generators. And there are plans to expand the generator footprint this year, but I'll let her talk in detail about that. So there was certainly a lot of discussions with our team, the finance team and the CAO leading up to this budget. About an overslide or a pressure slide. There was conversation about a pressure slide as well. But as we realized we needed to deal with the vacancy issues from last year, we knew we were going to have to use overtime to backfill those positions. So there was money added to our overtime to backfill those positions. And as we built the wage model with finance, we found that we could actually staff 2 more firefighters in Black Point and 2 more firefighters in to address some of our issues that we currently have, which ultimately would be half of a new station. And we may come back, we're coming back to council and hopefully get clarity on the station 8 or 9 issue. My long story short is, when we found out it could be fit into the wage model, the overslide or pressure slide was taken out. So you're right, there is no ask above the line for additional resources. The reality is we could not train any more firefighters within this year than the ones that are currently identified, either from the vacancies from last year as well as the additional ones. Any decision council would want to make to add staffing, the only place that we could accommodate that this year would be in an overtime line. So that's why it's not in there. We just physically could not train any more new recruits. Go ahead, Chief Fleck.
Thanks, Chief, Mr. Chair and Councillor. So to answer your question, we still have gaps in our response plan with where generators need to be, but we do have, in the capital budget, we have a 5-year plan. So sorry, year 1 was done. So we have another 4-year plan based on our biggest risk and where those generators need to go for the next 4 years. So, and we already have facilities and the generators picked out and where they need to be.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the presentation, and that's enough for me, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, staff, for the presentation and for all the work that the fire department does to keep us all safe. I have just one question, and it relates to the growth piece, and maybe it's more properly a planning and development question, I'm not sure. When you get a whole new community built, something like your Port Wallace, you know, we growth pays for growth is what we like to say in terms of roads and sidewalks, or when they're put in, they're built by the developer. Where do fire stations fit into that? Like if you're building a whole new area, are fire stations something that can be recovered as a capital cost contribution the way we can roads?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, that's probably a question better asked to finance and planning and development. And so I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but I can tell you that similar to what we do with parks and recs here, where developers identify a piece of property or development of a park and rec with a development. In previous jurisdictions, that has been something that we've done for emergency services, that at a minimum property is designated, or sometimes depending on the development, maybe they even erect the building, and then we would put staff into that. So that is what I was talking about, where we want to work closer with planning and development in the future to identify some of those opportunities and get out in front of the growth issue, as opposed to react to our data from last year. So the good news is we're now doing the data analysis. We're bringing in, we're planning to bring, you'll see in our business plan, we plan to work with a consultant this year to kind of take a look at that data and help develop more skills for predictive analysis for future growth. But to better answer your question, that would probably go to my colleague Kelly Denty.
If I may, Mr. Chair, perhaps where growth has been identified as a pressure for council's benefit, we could have just a one-pager briefing as to what whether or not capital cost contributions can include fire stations, what they can and cannot include. Because given this discussion today, I think it might be helpful, since staffing them is one part of our cost, but actually building the infrastructure is part of it too. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure if that was a request for a supplementary report on whether or not that would be possible. Just okay.
Just a briefing request, Mr. Chair. I don't actually need the whole formality of a report, just one of our one-pagers that we do during these sessions when we identify questions to look at. Sure.
Okay.
Chair, I think Peter Duncan's been working on a revision of development plans and CCCs, and hopefully that could be presented to us, because I absolutely agree with Sam's comments. Thanks, Tim.
Yes, and I agree as well. And we have a land lease community in Councillor Daigle Gammon's district that one of the deficiencies was a fire station. So that would certainly be helpful. At this point, I'd like to hand it over to Councillor Mancini. This is your second time speaking.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know what? I'm good. I think my other questions were all answered, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. In that case, Councillor Lovelace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a couple of questions for you, Chief. One is in regards to Marine Fire Service, and I'm wondering if you can touch on a little bit around, what are your requirements? What do you see coming in the future for Marine Fire Service? And just if you can talk a little bit about capital costs and operations coming in the future for that. And the other thing is around the ITC roadmap. And, while I recognize that obviously we've had some deficiencies with regards to capturing data and retrieving, and storing data and so on. I'm curious to know why we're not using Everbridge more. That alert system is so robust, and we have access to it. We're using it in notification of garbage collections and changes and so on. I just wonder if there's an opportunity for fire service and emergency to be using that more effectively.
Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair, to answer your question, I see Assistant Chief Fleck jumped on, so why don't we jump to your second question first, and then we'll prepare to answer your question about the marine firefighting.
Thanks, Chief, Mr. Chair, and Councillor. So again, we have big plans for HFX Alert, which is our Everbridge notification system, and it was a staged response and purchase when we did start that about a year and a half ago now. We bought it, we first got it literally the day that Hurricane Dorian came. So just, literally a day late, dollar short sort of thing. So we do have big plans. And so the way ahead, yes, we will certainly be using it more. Again, we had all sorts of strategic plans in place this year as part of the 5-year strategic emergency management plan, but COVID just really slowed me down tremendously. Having said that, we also have an emergency communications subcommittee being set up that was approved by the CAO and the directors as part of the emergency management committee that will be starting on within the next couple of weeks. And so that will certainly enable us to take a better and strategic picture on our emergency communications across all business units for our citizens.
Thank you, Assistant Chief Fleck. I will get Deputy Chief Andrews to expand a little bit more on the marine firefighting capability that we will shortly have here, and I'll maybe touch briefly on some current work that's we're doing with the Port Authority. So when, I know everybody keeps saying this, COVID-19 kind of derailed a lot of things that people were working on. One of the things that was derailed for us, while we still got our purchase order in for the boat that the deputy will be talking about, which will improve our capabilities, we had just started doing some assessments, community risk assessments as it pertains to the port. The port has hired a new harbor master. So they've backfilled a position that was vacant for some time, and the part of the harbor master's responsibility is actually emergency service and emergency response in the area that the Port Authority is responsible for. And actually, the individual who is now in charge of the Port Authority has a very strong background in emergency management and actually firefighting in marine environments. So they were very interested in meeting with us to figure out our current capabilities, which we'll explain are going to improve, and also our limitations, and a plan for us to work together to bridge any gaps that we identify. We know there's gaps, we just don't know how big those gaps are. So there is a commitment by the Port Authority to continue to look into that with us in collaboration and partnership and develop a plan moving forward. And certainly everybody's of the same understanding that the Port Authority is a federal responsibility, but we also have responsibilities. So our responsibilities are to protect the buildings that obviously are on the border, on the border between the water and the land, so to speak. And we're getting more and more buildings that are actually surrounded by 3 sides on water, which makes firefighting on a traditional fire truck platform difficult. We also, although not our primary mandate, respond to water rescue calls where people are in the water, and typically we respond quickly. So I think Deputy Chief Andrews will talk a little bit about that. And we also have some small marine vessels like marinas that is our responsibility, which is hard to fight from a traditional fire truck platform. So if you could expand a little bit more on that, that would be great. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, through to the councillor, thank you for your question. One of the things that did not get put aside by COVID is the construction of the harbor rescue boat that was approved by council last year. So that is tracking along, and we are expecting that boat to be delivered to Halifax for its final sea trials in early summer of this year, with a view to build and have that capacity for our harbor for firefighting and rescue in our Halifax harbor area. As you know, beyond our approaches, the Coast Guard through the JRCC is responsible for that kind of offshore rescue piece. As well as our current strategy, we do have a partnership with one of our local tugboat companies that also have pumping capacity that we could call upon them when in need for significant fires that would need a marine kind of access point. And as the chief had indicated, with the new Harbor Master, the Port Authority is keenly interested in kind of coordinating all these pieces of firefighting capability that exist here in Halifax to kind of bring to bear in a coordinated response for, in his particular case, all the you know, the commercial marine traffic that flows through Halifax. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it.
So maybe just one more piece to add to that, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair. In addition to the work we're doing with the Port Authority, we're also working, and you know, some of this was delayed because of COVID as well, with Department of National Defense, because obviously we have a Navy port here, and the Navy is well versed in shipboard firefighting. So while we are getting an asset that will be in the water 12 months of the year, response ready 24 hours a day, which currently is not the case. We take our boat out of the water in the fall because it's not suitable to stay in the water all winter. When we have that asset here, we plan to continue working with D&D to increase our shipboard firefighting skills. You know, and it does say in our administrative order that is one of the services that we're supposed to provide support for D&D to, but our goal would be eventually to develop the skills in partnership with D&D to be more able to deal with some of those calls if D&D is not available, possibly. The other thing, you know, obviously is some mitigation efforts. You know, we've seen a catastrophic port event that happened on the other side of the world within the last year. Certainly that's some of the stuff that's top of mind in our conversations with the Port Authority.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay, and thank you very much. I did have a number of questions, and basically all of them have been answered. There is only one that remains. And there are no further speakers on the list, so I'm just going to just take a couple of minutes. My question's in relation to the generators that are being put in the buildings, and it's phenomenal that the generators are being used as backup power systems, just in case the community loses power and people need a place to go and gather and warm up and things like that. The generator is one piece of a larger puzzle for that type of thing. A second one is the accommodations within the building. Is the building secure? Has it been refit? Is it able to accommodate sheltering people in an emergency basis when the power is out everywhere else? Another piece is communication. When there is no power, how do we get the word out to those affected that there is this refuge? And I'm just wondering if both of those could be addressed.
Mr. Chair, I see Assistant Chief Fleck online. I'll just defer to her right away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chief. So for the generators, Mr. Chair, they only go into locations after we've done a firm assessment on the building. And we have a checklist that says, you know, has to be so many square feet. They have to be accessible, wheelchair accessible. They have to have kitchen facilities, and the list goes on. So that, you know, if we have to turn it into an overnight shelter, that we never have to change spots. So that's the locations were all strategically picked to meet the criteria that would best suit the needs of the community. So that's number one, and each building is given a rating. Number two on the communication strategy. So we have two things. So we have obviously the HFX alert system, which would be, that's why we have it for, you know, mainly our number one priority was for emergencies. And so that will still go to people's home phones, cell phones, or email, whichever they signed up for, and understanding the lack of power, but it would still go to their cell phones. And then our backup for any very large crisis event is also the provincial emergency system, which we have very easy access to, that they can push out to everybody, as we've all seen, you know, a few times this year. And so we obviously can utilize that. And then we also have, with our corporate communications team, with the radio stations, and everything like that. So, and a lot of people listen to the radios, and we already have that set up.
That is fantastic. I had hoped for exactly that response, that the buildings were pre-vetted before the generators went in, so they're ready to go, and the communications would have a hierarchy that eventually got down to a public radio station where you don't need a cell phone and you can be somebody with a transistor radio at home. So thank you very much for that. Councillor Stoddard has come forward with a comment, so go ahead, Councillor Stoddard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of comments. As I had mentioned previously in one of your presentations, and thank you for this presentation, volunteers are extremely important, and I think the tracking of their participation is necessary for our full fire protection. And also, I'd like to give a shout out to Station 58, Timberley, Beachville, Lakeside, and Prospect. I had a personal experience with the professional services when my granddaughter, who was about 1.5 at the time, had a reaction to peanuts. The fire department arrived in less than 10 minutes, if that, and they were very professional, and they were followed almost within another 5 minutes by paramedics. The fire department with the paramedics stabilized her, and she was transferred to the IWK for observations. And just to let the fire department know, and I've told them in the past, that if you pass her a cookie or a snack, ever since she was about 3, she says, "Does it have peanuts? Nanny, does it have peanuts?" So I just wanted to thank you for your service, and I look forward to meeting with you again. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'm glad your granddaughter is well, and that everything went well with that. So appreciate that. I don't see any other
Sorry?
A good news story to end our presentation. Thank you for sharing.
That's right. Very much appreciate that. I don't see any further speakers. So seeing no further speakers, nobody is entering anything into the chat, so I'm going to hand it over to the clerk to call for the question. Thank you.
So I am just posting the motion on the floor in the chat right now, so everybody has it at the bottom of their screen. And beginning with District 6, Councillor Mancini.
For the motion.
7, Councillor Mason.
For the motion, though, we did have a question about whether we were going to go in camera there from daigle Gammon, Councillor daigle Gammon.
I wasn't sure about an in-camera session, and would that be appropriate for this session, or would it make sense to do that at another council meeting when there's, or at another budget meeting when there's a little bit more time to prepare for that?
Well, someone has to ask for us to go in camera, and we could do that as a committee, but no one has actually made that motion. So I guess if someone wants to, we could do that and vote after. Sorry, the clerk should probably say whether or not I got that right.
So,
Chair, my question was about process. We did have in camera booked, and there was a briefing note that was in camera, and I wasn't sure if it was going to be discussed.
If there's any questions, we would need to go in camera to answer them.
And I did not see any questions from anybody. Councillor daigle Gammon, would you like to discuss it? Would you like to have, well, do you have questions about it?
I do have a question about in camera. It would not make any difference to the vote. Fully support the budget. It doesn't make any difference to the vote. So if you wanted to continue with the vote, and then if we could go in camera, maybe that would be appropriate.
And is this something that the budget committee would be involved with, or would this be better as an offline discussion between you and the chief?
It's budget, future budget. The conversation earlier was around the implication of contract agreements.
Okay. Okay. So if we could. If we could go,
if it's budget related, Mr. Chair, I'd suggest to go in camera before voting on the budget.
That makes sense.
Question.
So, Councillor daigle Gammon, would you be interested in making a motion for us to go in camera?
Please, Mr. Chair. I have a motion for us to go in camera.
Mason. And Councillor Mason seconds that motion. I'm not sure about the process. I think we are able to suspend this vote and to go in camera. Is that correct, Mr. Traves? Okay. All in favor of going in camera?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Mr. Chair, I'm not opposed, but just from a procedural point of view, I just looked at our calendar. I don't see an in-camera invitation there.
So there was no in-camera meeting scheduled.
No.
If the committee would like to go in camera, we would need about 5 to 10 minutes to get that sent to you, and then we would have an in-camera session sent to your inbox.
Just, Mr. Chair, just a
Yes,
point
sir.
of order and supporting Kathy here, but if it's questions about ongoing contract negotiations, et cetera, that to me, I think would be separate from this budget discussion. So, I mean, I think we need to have a discussion in camera at some point. I don't know that it has to be done before today, first of all, or as part of this budget process. Maybe she can comment on this, but if it's overall contract discussions, then I think that could be done at another time if that helps us right now.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Absolutely.
So earlier in our conversation, we had a conversation on the budget about the impact of collective agreements and what that might mean to future budgets. And so that was probably the place where my question was going. And so if there is not a need for it to be in camera, I'm fine.
So maybe Ms. Fraser or I can assist with that in the sense that collective agreements are dealt with in terms of the outcomes of that in the larger HRM budget in finance. Jane, did you want to add to that?
Certainly. Thank you, John. Mr. Chair, through you to the Council and Committee, Councillor and Committee. So what we do is when there's negotiations going on, we'll hold some funding in fiscal in the compensation area. And then as collective agreements are settled, we then roll that out into the business unit. So it's the same if it's QP, we would put it into TPW, QP, ATU, or any of the other collective agreements that would be open.
Yeah, so they're not in fire's budget. They're held in fiscal, in the fiscal budget.
Mr. Chair, it's
yes, sir.
The fire chief here. I think the question that the councillor had was not necessarily about collective agreements so much as mutual aid, automatic aid agreements. Maybe we could just confirm there's some ability to deal with any impacts of contract negotiations through some other means other than this motion, I think is really her question. Maybe I don't want to speak for you, councillor.
Thank you very much, Chief Stubing. The question was both. It was around our mutual aid agreements, and then it was, but again, I don't mean to prolong this conversation, so I can ask the question outside of the budget meeting, no problem.
I think I can help, though, if I may, Mr. Chair, John Traves, Municipal Solicitor. So automatic and mutual aid agreements are within the chief's authority under the HFRE administrative order in terms of negotiating, and they would traditionally come out of his budget, and so effectively he has quite broad authority to negotiate those agreements and for the provision of services either to or from outside entities, and subject to what funds he has in his budget. So he would have that in mind as he would negotiate.
Clarification. I did not know that part. Thank you.
So have we resolved the issue for today about whether or not we're going to go in camera?
No need to go in camera from my point of view now with this new information. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Councillor Daigle Gammon. Over to the clerk. Please continue with the roll.
So again, the question on the floor, the motion on the floor is in the chat. I am going to start from the top and begin again with District 6 and Councillor Mancini.
Well, after that discussion, I'm now against the motion. No, just kidding. Fully for the motion on the floor.
District 7, Councillor Mason.
For the motion with no objections to going ahead this time.
8, Councillor Smith.
4.
9, Councillor Cleary.
Yes.
10, Councillor Morse.
For the motion.
11, Councillor Cuttle.
For the motion.
12, Councillor Stoddard.
Voting yes for the motion.
District 13, Councillor Lovelace.
Voting yes.
14, Councillor Blackburn.
Voting in favor of the motion.
15, Chair Russell.
In favor?
16, Deputy Mayor Outhitt.
Voting yes.
1, Councillor Daigle Gammon.
In favor of the motion.
2, Councillor Hensby.
Affirmative.
3, Councillor Kent.
In favor.
4, Councillor Purdy.
In favor and very thankful for our firefighters.
5, Councillor Austin.
In favor.
Mayor Savage.
In favor?
Wonderful. The motion passes. We have direction about the fire budget to continue forward, so that is fantastic. The next item on the agenda is adjournment, and so we would be meeting again on Tuesday, March 9th at 11 a.m. for Regional Council. Please note that the time for that is 11 a.m. It was just adjusted a day or two ago. So if I could have a motion to adjourn, please.
Move adjourned.
Motion to adjourn. Thank you. We stand adjourned. Have a great afternoon, everybody, and we'll see you later.
You take care.
Thank
Bye.
you very much, Chief. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Take
Thank
care.
you.